Personal behaviours, organisational behaviours, but individual behaviours are actually the key to success in this respect. And those personal relationships, when you look at places that have gone further and faster, it's because of the high levels of personal trust between the organisations, senior politicians, non-executives, but also staff at all levels in those organisations. And that's the key lubricant for successful integration. But of course, this context is terribly difficult for that, because we're dramatically changing the personnel that sit around the table from the health service side, and we're also changing the employment with all the issues associated with that for some of the key players joining local government. And by the way, we're stripping out a whole load of staff in local government whose job used to be to work in this sort of space. And then we've got to think about accountability mechanisms. And again, I'd reinforce the point I made about population accountability and service accountability. If people have a collective sense of responsibility for 4 or 5 things that everybody's agreed are priorities, and an obvious shared report card on how all that is going, people have much closer affiliation with it. People see the point of coming around the table because there's something in it for them and for their population. But if there's a considerable focus on bureaucratic mechanisms, or this can only be agreed when all 6 different groups have all taken it through their boards, all those sorts of issues, if there isn't proper delegation, then it can all undermine. And we need to have what Gerald Wistow in his report talks about, a warp and a weft of partnership and planning, which is things that unite people sideways, the way that people work together, the way that staff work together, the shared outcomes that people have, and then the upward bits being joined as well. And that's where I think health and wellbeing boards, if they work well, could be really useful. And the last message from this study is where the organisation of all this sits. And Gerald concluded, and I very much agree with him, that these horizontal mechanisms need a single owner just to make sure things happen, to follow through and those sorts of things. So initiating, supporting, progressing the horizontal stuff should rest with a single organisation. So people should take away their responsibility to do the bits that go sideways, even if the bits that go upwards are shared with the Health and Wellbeing Board. And that's my point about service accountability and population accountability. I'm going to take this one away, and I'm going to make it work, and I'll take responsibility for bringing it together on behalf of the wider partnership. So to conclude, and I hope this is drawn from what I've said, and I'm very happy to get into discussion in a moment. I think that if this is going to work, everybody in the system, particularly the Department of Health and ministers and the different organisations with an interest in the people sitting around the table, regulators and performance management and all those sorts of things, that need to realise that, need to be comfortable about diversity of approach, about something that looks right for the place, and to encourage people to take time to build those relationships and trust, and therefore not to load too much onto what will be a very immature set of relationships, and certainly not to prescribe structures, not to say they should all look like this. And as far as health and wellbeing boards are concerned, I think to work effectively, they probably are going to be relatively small groups, but they need to think through their engagement with all those people round the table. And the places that I've worked with, I've suggested the concept of what I call chapter groups. I can't work out whether that's a book or Hell's Angels, but by that I mean if you've got 4 or 5 priorities for the place that everybody agrees are, the things you're trying to do for this place, then you can involve all sorts of people in work that will make a difference in that, outside the formality of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and then invite them in when you're discussing that priority and mandating the work that's associated with that. These are cultural issues. They're not, and you need to create a shared culture and not to get too preoccupied with reporting lines outside. And one of my favourite phrases about joint planning, about this sort of partnership working, is that partnership exists only in conversations. It doesn't practically exist in conversations. And many of those conversations people should be free to have outside of meetings, bilaterally, rather than every conversation taking place within the formal constraints of what will be a council committee, because it has to be constructed in a particular way, and for people to be okay about that, and for managers to be relaxed about ideas developing that way. Don't get too bogged down in processes, don't create complex machinery, think about and be focused on outcome. And I think it's really important that leadership and ownership of these new responsibilities for health and well-being are appropriately cascaded down through organisations so that everybody feels there's something in it. I'm very worried that some places may be tempted to bubble wrap the public health function as a function because of all the things it's got to do, rather than seek to embed its influence right across the organisation as a whole. And it's a really tricky one when you've got all these new statutory responsibilities and you've got directors of public health pitching to be taken seriously as chief officers in the council, but actually they need to be massively influential across everything a council does. And finally, I hope the system will allow places to pick 4 or 5 locally important quick wins that give everybody confidence that there's a point to it all, that have a appropriate balance of what's important to everybody sitting around the table. So somebody gets something out of these quick wins, because actually my worry is that if we don't see that quickly, if it doesn't look locally relevant, if it seems to be feeding a national machine, leaders of councils will walk away because they're bored. Clinical commissioning groups will walk away, and you'll have the commissioning support organisation who will look very like the PCT person you had before, and the prospects of real change will be constrained and limited. So quick wins, but long-term ambition is my main message for health and wellbeing boards. So finally, how does this look compared to 1962 or 1974 or 1976 or 1990? I'm pretty optimistic about it, because I think that local government's so up for this, and it's actually being taken very seriously by the senior levels of local government. Leaders are getting enthused about it. People see this as the potential for making a real difference to places and opening up the opportunity to influence health. So I'm optimistic about it. What would close it down? Stalinist behaviour by the National Commissioning Board, saying CCGs can only do the following things, and not allowing any local discretion about the use of health resources in support of the wider health and social care economy. And that would destroy it. So I'm optimistic, but I see the risks. Thanks very much.